Good evening. It looks like folks have arrived. Welcome to McKenzie River Trust's first HabiChat, Forest Treasures, Finding and Enjoying Wild Mushrooms, with the wonderful Bruce Newhouse. My name is Holly, and I am the Events and Outreach Manager for McKenzie River Trust. And it's such a pleasure to join you, albeit virtually this evening. Before we begin, I'm going to go over just a few housekeeping pointers about this Zoom platform. When you entered the webinar, the system automatically put you on mute and turned off your webcam. So you're in a view only, listen only mode. After Bruce's presentation, we'll have some time for questions and answers. And I'm very happy to share that Peg Boulay will be joining us for this part of the program this evening. You can submit a question at any point during tonight's presentation. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. So you just type in your question there. And we may not have time to get to all the questions, but we will certainly do our best. If you have to leave the presentation or have technical difficulties, we will be sending an email out tomorrow that will include a link to this presentation, so you'll be able to watch it there. I know many of you attending tonight are friends and members of McKenzie River Trust. Please know that we appreciate your support and sure do miss greeting you in person with hugs and handshakes and seeing your faces out in the field. For those of you who are new to MRT, welcome. McKenzie River Trust is a nonprofit land trust that works to protect the lands and rivers we all love in Western Lane County. Our organization has been at this work for just a little over 30 years. We have 6,700 acres of land under our management, from the Cascades to the coast. Throughout the year, we're engaged in restoration and stewardship activities of all kinds. We provide volunteer opportunities for those wanting to get their hands dirty and help us achieve our work. And in non-COVID years, we offer tours and educational opportunities on the land. If you'd like to join us in this work, a gift of any size makes you a member. And later this evening, I'll be posting a link in the chat box. If you'd like to become a member, we would welcome you. Times are really hard right now and everything is difficult. Honestly, I don't know anyone who isn't suffering in some way. Please know that I'm very aware of the multitude of distractions happening right now, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. This morning, I heard an interview with Barbara Kingsolver, and she was talking about the solace that nature provides during especially difficult times. It's my hope that an hour of focused on mushrooms will help draw attention to the magic happening on the forest floor and inspire us all to get out there and explore with an eye for these fascinating species. I'd now like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Mr. Bruce Newhouse. Bruce is a field ecologist who specializes in plants and fungi and the animals that interact with them. Bruce is a frequent volunteer and contributor to the McKenzie River Trust, including serving on our lands committee. He also volunteers with the Cascade Mycological Society, the Oregon Flora Project, the Friends of Buford Park, the Native Plant Society of Oregon, the Lane County Master Gardeners, and iNaturalist. And I am willing to bet that many of you out there this evening have also been on a tour with Bruce and Peg in the past. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Bruce. Bruce, if you would like to turn on your video and your mic. Thank you for being here, Bruce.
Thank you, Holly. That was great. Holly has another career waiting for her. She could be like a TV host or something. That was beautiful. Thanks for tuning in. I guess we call that tuning in tonight for this little webinar. I guess it's going to be a series. It's going to be called HabiChats, and I'm the first one tonight. I'm happy to do that, happy to be here. If you see me put my glasses on and stare over here, it's because I'm looking to see if somebody is sending me a message like Holly or Peg, like I'm doing something wrong. But don't worry if you see me do that. I'm going to try to keep my glasses off because with them on, you see my computer reflecting, it's kind of annoying. So I'll try to keep them off as much as I can. And turning now to mushrooms, the first question on everyone's mind is, what about all these fires and stuff? How's it going to affect mushrooming? Well, it's going to affect it a lot, certainly, especially up the McKenzie, but also there's a lot of places we can go mushrooming right now that are not affected by the fires. And it is the start of the mushroom season, so the early things are out there, and I'm excited to get going here real soon. October, November, and early December tend to be the biggest months for mushrooming here in the Willamette Valley. And there's some interest in some people in morel hunting, but that is only in the spring, as you're going to find out in just a moment. The other thing I just like to say is it's pretty fun when you study mushrooms and enjoy mushrooms and get out and look for mushrooms, because it's like having two springs every year. One spring is the normal spring where all the flowers come out and the morels. And then the other spring is now when the rains start. Oh, I can't wait for the rains to start. We need a little bit more rain. We've had some, and that's starting things out. So the timing of this is actually really good for those of you who think you might be interested in doing a little more mushrooming this year. So let me see if I can jump into my program here by hitting the right buttons, that button, and this button, and then one more after this. And here we go. Okay. So finding and enjoying wild mushrooms. Some of the things I'm going to cover tonight in the next 45 minutes or so are what are mushrooms and what do they do? Who collects them? How do you find them and identify them? How do you clean them and preserve them and cook them? And where you might go if you want to learn more. That's a lot to do in 40 minutes. So we're basically going to do the essentials. And if you want to learn more, that's where you can spend lots and lots of time if you want. You might recognize that face right there. It's just pure coincidence. She happens to be on the first slide of my show. Forest treasures, finding and enjoying wild mushrooms. We're going to start, I'm going to start, pardon me again, also if I say we, because I've done this with Peg before, and Peg, my wife, and I'm used to having her at my side here as I do this, so I might say we sometimes, unknowingly. So I am going to talk first about fungal ecology and foraging, and I'm going to talk about the macrofungi, the big ones, and the ones that we can, especially the ones we can eat. I'm not going to talk about every little microfungi like molds and all that would put you to sleep in about 5 minutes, unless you're a mycologist, and some of those mycologists, as you know, are pretty crazy people. They love molds. I'm going to start by asking you if you know what the biggest living organism is in the world. And keep in mind, this is a fungus presentation. So yes, you're right. It's a fungus. It happens to be in Oregon too, which is kind of cool. It's a parasitic fungus. It's called the honey mushroom, Armillaria ostoyae, and it's in northeastern Oregon. It's about 2,400 acres. That's almost 4 square miles in the Malheur National Forest. Age range estimates between 1,900 and 8,650 years old. That is old. We don't recommend eating honey mushrooms here because we're still learning about different species that occur here also, but they do eat honey mushrooms with a great vigor back in the Midwest, especially like Wisconsin, up in that area. For those of you who want to know exactly where it is, on the left side of your screen down there, you can see Prairie City. And the right side, you can see the humongous fungus. That's the nickname for this thing. It's the approximate location, and why it doesn't fill that whole area devoid of trees, I don't know exactly. What I do know is there are other honey mushroom organisms in the area that are smaller and not as old. And so maybe that's why there's a larger area than just the white line showing where the single humongous fungus is. But that's the big one. That's the grandmother of them all right there. So what are mushrooms exactly? Well, mushrooms are fruiting bodies for a spider web that's under the soil called the mycelium. Each little strand of that spider web is called a hyphae, the hyphae. So the mushrooms are made up of the same strands. There's just a whole lot of them that come together and form a mushroom, which is the mushroom's way of reproducing. It's a fungus's way of reproducing by creating this above ground little mushroom in the case of the macrofungi that we're talking about tonight. The kingdom of fungi is like the kingdom of plants or the kingdom of animals. They are not plants. They are in their own kingdom, the kingdom of fungi. Their cell walls are made of chitin, like some of the crunchy insects you've probably eaten lately. Well, maybe you have. They absorb their food. They don't put it inside them and absorb it. They absorb it from the outside in. So they absorb it in their environment and then consume it after it is broken down into their nutrients that they want. So if you are an evolutionist and you create an evolutionary tree and you look at where plants and animals separate and fungi separate, plants broke off earlier from animals and fungi. Fungi broke off later. So that means fungi are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. Sleep on that one for a while. If we look at fungi and their roles in the ecosystem, there's kind of three ways we can look at it. One is fungi that form plant partnerships. These are three different kinds of fungi, three different roles that different fungi might have. Some actually may have more than one role. The second role is recycling nutrients back into the soil so that plants and other fungi and other animals can use those nutrients. And the third role that some other fungi have is parasitizing. Remember the largest fungus I just mentioned, the humongous fungus, being a parasite? It's a parasite when it's on living trees, but when it kills those trees, it can become a recycler and recycle those trees back into the soil, and it can then be what's called a saprophytic fungus. But I'm getting slightly ahead of myself. Plant partners are also called mycorrhizal fungi. Myco means fungus in Greek, and rhiza means root. What they are is a coating, those little tiny fibers I mentioned coat the roots of plants and penetrate inside the roots of those plants. And it's really a win-win because the fungal fibers are so numerous and so small, they contact a lot of soil and thereby contact a lot of nutrients and a lot of water that the plants can't get to with their big clumsy old roots. So it's a matter of scale that the tiny little fungal fibers can provide so much in the way of nutrients and water to the trees and other plants and the shrubs and the herbaceous plants on the floor. In return, those plants are making food. They're photosynthesizing. So they're making starches and sugars that are valuable to the fungus that the fungus needs to grow in order to grow, to make mushrooms and reproduce and so forth. So they're winning too. It's a win-win. It's good for the plants to have them and it's good for the fungi to have them. And this goes way back to way prehistoric time that these relationships have been going on. And so we are still teasing those out and trying to figure out what came first here, the chicken or the egg, the fungus or the plant, or maybe they came at the same time. But they're pretty much hard to separate now. They're certainly intertwined now and dependent on each other. Oftentimes you can really think of them as one organism. And if one fungus hooks up to several trees, it becomes sort of maybe a super organism. So yeah, and you could have one tree that might have different fungi species on different parts of its roots, and could be up to 100 species even on different parts of its roots. But I'm going to come back down to earth for a moment. If you're holding, just for a moment, okay, now we're going out into outer space again. If you hold soil in your hand, just a little bit of soil, and think that, it doesn't have much weight, but it has some, about 50% of that can be fungus, fungal hyphae in the soil. If you have about a cubic inch of soil, you could have up to 8 miles of fungal hyphal strands going through that square inch. Pretty cool, huh? Cubic inch. So yeah, it's small stuff. It takes a microscope to see it, and except for the honey fungus, which makes real coarse, those black cords. But most fungi, you can't really see them unless you put them under a microscope. You can't see those strands. Also on this slide, note the Pacific golden chanterelle. You're going to see that picture again. It's in the lower left, and in the lower right, the king bolete. Those are both prime edibles. The second category I mentioned is the recyclers or decomposers. The The saprophytic mushrooms break down organic matter. That's somebody's got to do it. And it's bacteria, they do it, and fungi do it also. And if they weren't doing it, we'd be in very deep piles of dead leaves all the time. That's how important it is. I mean, that's a real obvious example of how they break things down. If nothing was breaking those down, we'd be deep. So some of the examples of these that are edible, I guess I should have mentioned that also for the mycorrhizal ones. The examples of the edible ones there are the two pictures you saw, the chanterelle and the bolete are good examples of edible species of mycorrhizal fungi. For saprophytes, the edible examples are the button mushrooms that you buy in the store, the shaggy parasol mushroom, which is illustrated here in the upper right, lion's mane mushroom. Those are all edible. What is not edible is in the lower right, the yellow steiner. This is probably the most common mushroom in Eugene, Springfield. You don't have to go up in the woods to find it. It's probably in your yard or in your parking strip by the street or in your neighbor's yard. It's very common and very numerous around here, and it was not here about 10 or 15 years ago. So there's some thought that maybe it's some kind of invasive species. So I brought some to show you here. First, I'm going to show you one picture here. They're called yellow stainers because if you rub them a little bit on the edge, they turn yellow. And it just in a matter of seconds. So you can see here in this, on these photographs, the yellow spots are where I've rubbed the mushroom and then taken a picture of it. It'll eventually turn brown. You know what, I was gonna try to do it for you live in front of a light here, but I think I'm gonna run out of time. I can tell already I'm in a chatty mood tonight. So if we have time at the end, I'll do it, but I'll skip that for now. I got a bunch of them from my neighbor's yard. It's the only thing that's really fruiting in our neighborhood right now, and I've seen it in 2 different areas already. But I have gone on walks around the neighborhood and seen it in the fall, the last couple of years, and seen 10, 12, 15 places where it's fruiting just around the neighborhood. The tiny photo near the center is in a parking strip. That's the kind of thing you might see. So the third category is the parasites. And yes, my wife, Peg, is illustrated here, but no, she's not a parasite. She has lived with me for years, so I guess I'm the host. No, anyway, enough with that analogy. Parasites can live with their host for many, many years. They can also be a decomposer, as I mentioned with the honey mushroom. And in general, they're not edible. The honey mushroom would probably be the exception to that. But again, we don't really eat them around this area because we're finding that there's more species here than we thought. And we don't know that all those species are edible. So to avoid confusion, and because there's so many other good edibles, I think I recommend don't eating them. But some other people you might talk to might like them. Different kinds of people collect mushrooms or admire mushrooms. Commercial harvesters do it for a living, and they have to get generally permits to do that on National Forest land or Bureau of Land Management land. The second category that's pretty big is recreational pickers. CMS is the Cascade Mycological Society. Peg and I helped form that back in 1999 here in Eugene. And we are recreational pickers, and I would say the vast majority of people are interested in that mushroom club because of edible mushrooms. There's lots of mushroom clubs across the United States and probably quite a few in Europe and other places too. There's also a few scientists. Milko, down at the bottom there, MLCOs, Milko, that's the macrofungi of Lane County, Oregon project. That is a project of the Cascade Mycological Society to list every species of fungi in Lane County. Wow. We're up to about 750 so far after 2 years. That's right, I said 750. So here's a couple of commercial pickers, I think. I'm not really sure exactly, but I think they're commercial. Maybe some of you recognize those young pickers there. You know, kids are really good at mushroom picking because they're low to the ground, and a lot of the mushrooms that we seek are on the ground. And so take your kids out and you'll be surprised how many more mushrooms they find than you do. So, wasn't supposed to do that. Huh. Well, I think we might be No, we're good. Finding, identifying, how do you identify forest mushrooms? Peg on the left there in the photo is holding some great king bolates. And there's Brandy again on the right. She's sniffing a goat's beard mushroom, both good edibles. So what are some of the ways, you know where to go and how to recognize what you're looking for? This is good that you're watching the show because this is a good introduction to it. You got to start somewhere. So lookalikes are really important. You want to learn, if you're going to learn chanterelles or bolates, you want to learn other species that look like it so that you don't accidentally pick the wrong thing. You want to learn the habitat, where it grows, and even the microhabitat within that where it might grow. The seasonality of it, and then also, where to go? Where can I go? Do I need a permit for it? There are quite a few different kinds of permits to get from different landowners. Most people go picking a national forest land, and if you can believe this, it's different if you go to the Cascades and go to the Willamette National Forest than it is if you go to the Coast Range and go to the Siuslaw National Forest. So they have separate rules and they're on their websites. So we recommend you go to their website and get the permit you need. In general, for up to a gallon per day, you're okay without a permit. But read what it says on the website. They do change that sometimes, and I wouldn't want to be responsible for you getting a ticket. So don't pick too much, and don't pick the species they list as not good to pick and that sort of thing. Let's see, how to go. Well, it's good to get a search image. Right under the word search image, you see those little orange spots are what chanterelles kind of look like in the forest. When Peg and I go out mushrooming, the first one of us to find mushrooms doesn't pick it. They call the other person over so they can see what it kind of looks like, get a feel for it. Then you kind of feel better about knowing what you're looking for when you get out there. Even if you know what you're looking for, it just kind of helps cement it in your mind right there on the site you're on, what it might look like. These are a couple of examples of what mushrooms, kind of classic looking mushrooms might look like. On the left is really classic. It's the flying amanita. It's illustrated in children's tales from Scandinavia and just all over everywhere. You see this one, bright red with the white spots on top. So the tops of the mushrooms are generally called the caps. Underneath the caps, they often have gills. Now notice I put gills, etc. I'm going to get back to that in just a moment because there can be other things like pores underneath there. Below that, you might have a ring or an annulus. On the left, on the flying amanita, you see a big ring that's called a felty ring or skin-like ring. And on the right, you see some orange little fibers there. They're both parts of a structure that enveloped or covered the gills as the mushroom was young and expanding. And now that it's fully expanded, it wants the gills to be open, exposed to the air so we can let spores out. Before that time, these flaps of skin or strands of tissue here helped protect the very young gills. On the left, we can't see any color of the spores, but on the right, on the purple mushroom, we can see those spores. Those fibers that are on the stem are actually not rusty colored. They're catching rusty colored spores, and you can see the rusty colored spores on some of the gills on that purple mushroom. Wow, that's pretty amazing to find a purple court or violet court and see the spores on it like that. That's pretty cool. The stems are sometimes called stipes just because stems are what plants have, and so some people say, well, then let's call them something else, so call them whatever you want, stipe or stem. At the bottom of the amanita, they have a little cup-like structure. A lot of them do, almost all of them do. It's called a vulva, and it's sort of a little egg-like structure that the whole mushroom comes up out of. There's only one other kind of mushroom that has that, and that's the straw patty mushroom from Southeast Asia. So it's pretty unique. If you dig up an amanita a little bit, very gently, you can get the whole vulva. Other mushrooms like the violet courtier, don't have anything at the base, really. They just have some strands that connect in with those little tiny fine hyphae all over. Both of these mushrooms are mycorrhizal, and neither one of them is edible. You can kind of do backflips and stuff, I think, and eat the one on the left, but gee, I wouldn't do it. There's so many good edibles to do. You have to boil and pour the water out and boil it again and pour the water out and all that to get rid of the toxins, and forget it. There's too many other good things to eat. Why risk it? So some of the mushrooms don't have that neat little cap and gill structure. So yeah, we have quite a variety going on in the kingdom of fungi there. On the left, they produce the spores right on the outside of those little fingers. On the right is a conch. You've probably all seen some version of this, a conch on the tree. It's got little tiny pores underneath it, and that's where the mushroom is releasing its spores. The spores come out of the pores. And the bottom is a puffball. It's collectively known as the stomach fungi, all the things like puffballs. They make their spores inside. When it gets really, really mature, it'll crack and open, and if it's dry, those spores will fly out. If it's wet and a raindrop hits it, it'll force the spores out as well. So there's different ways that mushrooms can produce and release their spores. Here's some of the underside differences to show you. There's 3 photos here. The upper photo is kind of a double. On the left side of it are little teeth. That's another way that spores can be produced and released on those little teeth. On the right are more of the classic gills. This one has a lot of gills. They're tight together. So it's going to be producing a lot of spores, maybe billions of spores in the week or two that it's producing. The lower 2 photos both show pores that produce spores. So like the bottom of that conch I showed on the tree would have pores similar to this. When you're in the woods, you want to try to identify everything you can about a mushroom. If you're trying to figure out what it is exactly, you want to know the shape of the mushroom, the size, the color, and the texture. Is it like that top picture? It looks pretty slimy, doesn't it? If you were to touch the top of that, your finger would probably have a mucousy kind of slime on it. And the middle one, on the other hand, isn't that way. And I think it's more than rain going on here, but that might play into it too. If it's raining, they're probably all going to feel wet, but to actually feel sticky and wet, that's kind of slimy. That's different, and that's important to note whether our mushroom has that or not. The chemical characteristics of the mushrooms, like whether they smell, a lot of mushrooms smell. It's very interesting. Whether they stain, like that yellow stainer I showed you. A lot of mushrooms stain blue. It's very interesting, or green. You also want to take note of what substrate it's growing on. That is it growing on a tree or on the ground, or maybe on some wood buried under the ground? You want to look at that spore-bearing surface to see that one of those things I just showed you in the picture. Does it have gills? Does it have teeth? Does it have pores? And then if you really want to get into this like a scientist, you get some of those spores on a paper and make a spore print, and you can see spores of any mushroom that way, or put them onto a microscope slide and look at it in a microscope if you really want to go for it. And you can get not only the color of the spores there, but you'll also get the shape of the spores and whether they're ornamented or not, which is very important. An ornamented spore has little spikes on it usually, or bumps on it, something like that. And that can help us figure out what a species of mushroom is. There are some apps available for identifying mushrooms, but we recommend against them. A few years ago, 4 people from Alpine were hospitalized after eating mushrooms they identified with a phone app. So one of the problems is if you're going to try to think of it from a developer's point, if you're going to try to sell something, you can't just do mushrooms of Eugene. It's only going to sell 10 copies, well, maybe 100 if you're lucky. So you cover a wide area. well, the wide area gets ridiculous and makes it hard to figure out what you've got. And they may not have your local species in it. They may have something that's well known, but from far away. And I had to laugh just a while ago. I looked at, this is the first time I noticed this in several years, that photo in the lower right is a death cap, not a death cup. So they didn't even get the name right. So am I going to trust them with one of the most poisonous mushrooms in the world if they can't even get the name right? I don't think so. So anyway, we recommend against using any apps. If they come out with a really good Oregon one or Oregon Washington one that's really thorough, great. But whoever does it's going to have to be very nonprofit because it's not going to make much money. So know your lookalikes. If you have several specimens available to you in the field, look at those. If you have several guides available, look at those. I do that on a pretty daily basis, looking at different books to see what different authors say about certain species, and consider that geographic location. You know, if the app has a distribution of North America that they're trying to cover in there, they're not going to cover Oregon stuff very similarly. Remember what I said a few minutes ago? There's 758 already known in just Lane County. So yeah, okay. The last thing there is get confirmations. So, you know, come to CMS meetings. I guess they're actually going to be kind of remote for a while. We don't know how long, of course, because of COVID, but try to get some confirmation from CMS people if you can. There is a great resource out there, which I don't use, called the Pacific Northwest Mushroom ID Facebook page, something like that. People love that. They're always, every day, people are putting up beautiful pictures on there. You have to be careful who identifies your pictures online because sometimes people know what they're talking about and sometimes they don't. So it's good to kind of lurk for a while on a page like that, and you kind of learn who is efficient and proficient at identifying mushrooms correctly. Then you can put up your picture and say, I found this today, I don't know what it is, and see if you get a response. There's a couple of reasons I don't like using a commercial service, that's one, like Facebook. So I use a non-commercial one, which is called iNaturalist, and then it's abbreviated iNat. And it is operated by the University of California and National Geographic. And they will, some expert will look at your stuff and ID it similarly, but it doesn't go away after a few days or a month or whatever. It goes into a permanent database. So if you take good pictures, that will get you good IDs. That will allow people to ID it good, and it will also become a part of a permanent record. So those are, I think, good reasons to use iNaturalist. On the left is one of our prize edibles, matsutake. On the right is one of our prize poisonous mushrooms, not prize, booby prize poisonous mushrooms, Smith's Amanita. You want to be sure that you know what a matsutake smells like. You could take these two mushrooms right here, put them in front of my nose, and I can identify them with my eyes closed. Because matsutake has such an individual, unique smell, I don't even have to look at the ring on the stem or the brown tones in it or the habitat or anything else that might help me know that it's a matsutake. And somebody made a mistake up in Hood River somewhere a few years ago and picked a bunch of Smith's Amanitas thinking they were matsutakes and gave them to a friend. So as Peg likes to say, know your mushrooms. No, be careful when you pick your mushrooms and be careful when you pick your friends. I probably messed that up, but something like that. Make sure you pick your friends right. So yeah, it's good to doubt mushrooms a little bit from somebody that you don't know is a really good expert at them. Very good. But we've only had one person die here in the last few years that I know of from mushrooms, and it wasn't due to eating wild mushrooms. But it was a common way that mushroom hunters become at risk. So what was it? Oh, somebody's got their hand up. Oh, you're right, yes. Hypothermia. When you're out hunting mushrooms, when I'm out hunting mushrooms, I look down at the ground a lot. even though some of those things like lion's mane might be up in a tree, I look up occasionally if it's a dead snag or something, but I'm looking at the ground a lot and I can forget where I came from and where I was. So I can't stress enough to always go out with a buddy when you go out mushrooming and look up a lot and remember where you left your car and know where you are. Learn how to read a map well and use a compass or a compass app on your phone and hope the batteries don't die. But those are good techniques to use. If you don't learn that stuff, you're going to want to stay pretty close to a road or a trail in your car in safety. But get a buddy and that'll help a lot. So really quickly, I'm going to cover cleaning, cooking, and preserving, and then we're going to take some questions. So fungi are eaten by a lot of things besides people, and because other things eat them doesn't mean people can eat them. So they have different digestive systems than we do. So be careful if you see tooth marks, don't assume that means you can eat it. Don't assume anything, just assume that some critter had a good meal. Some mushrooms are cultivated, like the button mushrooms you buy in the store, and then some mushrooms are wild grafted. Some stores have those, and they sell them fresh and they sell them dried. And different cultures around the world vary tremendously. Eastern European and Southeast Asian cultures tend to wildcraft mushrooms, pick mushrooms out in the wild as part of life. You just do it. You grow up learning it as a child. Other cultures have a fear of mushrooms bred into them, and we're somewhere closer to the fear side in our culture than the non-fear side. So anyway, here's a couple of, here's matsutake, and on the right is some lion's mane being made into soup. Here's some more cultivated mushrooms, criminées, and they're starting lately to, in the lower right, you see the white one, that's called lion's mane or bear's head. They're starting to cultivate that more recently. And you can buy some kits and do your own cultivation. It's a little tricky, a little hard, and easier to buy them at the store if they have them. This is a picture of Sweden, of a market in Sweden, showing a little difference maybe in culture and how important the mushrooms are in the market. You know, I didn't notice this before, but man, they grow great bananas in Sweden too, don't they? Collecting and eating wild mushrooms safely is about 35 edible species. If you're gonna start learning edible ones, don't try to learn 35 edible species and all their lookalikes. Try to learn a couple and their lookalikes, and then add on to that. Every year, learn a few more. Cook all your mushrooms thoroughly, we recommend, because that cell structure, each cell is made of chitin, and all the nutrients are locked in there. In order to get them released, you're gonna have to break down the chitin. So cook your mushrooms thoroughly. Also, they digest better if you do that anyway. The first time you eat a new mushroom, be very careful. There are rules on the Cascade Mycological Society website about that. I'm gonna speed up a little bit here because I want to be sure to leave some time for questions. Yeah, there's a lot of cleaning to do when you pick wild mushrooms and bring them home. And try to minimize your use of water, blasting them off if you can, particularly like chanterelles like to absorb all that water. So try to do more brushing and less rinsing if you can. Brushing is good. Do it in the field if you can, before it goes in your basket. That's a great place to do it. There's a lot of ways you can cook mushrooms. You can saute them with butter. A lot of people like them with cream and sherry. Don't count the calories, please. Jack Charnick is a very famous mushroom chef. His holy trinity for cooking mushrooms is salt, sugar, and soy. I assume tamari would work just fine too. I want to try more roasted mushrooms. Broiled and roasted is a way of cooking them. We haven't done enough roasting. I want to roast more. Grilled on the barbecue is wonderful. Stuffed in gravy, soups, egg dishes, and all kinds of things. So here's, I'm going to go really fast. Here's some chanterelles. There's golden and white and black or blue chanterelles there. That's what they look like when you pick them. Look at all those needles you want to brush off, all those fir needles and hemlock needles. I think that's Brandy's back porch, I'm not sure. But she won't tell you where she got these, I'm sure of that. Notice in the lower left, there's a pink edge on that, and it's kind of a curled under edge. That's called the pink-edged chanterelle. There's 3 different kinds here of golden chanterelles, and 1 kind of white chanterelle, which this is. Very chunky, very good. And some lookalikes. On the left, number 1 is a chanterelle. Number 2 is a false chanterelle. And number 3 is a scaly chanterelle. Only number 1 is edible. Number 2 and 3 would make you sick, so learn them. Those are lookalikes. Number 2 always has that skinny little stem and it has very thin, regular gills, whereas the chanterelle has pretty thick gills and a thick stem. Number 3 has a hollow stem if you cut through it, and number 1 does not. Number 3 is also scaly on top. If you look at the bottom where it's bright red, orange there, see those kind of scales? Those scales can wash off in the rain, so be a little careful about that. But the stem, you can always cut the stem open, and number 3 will have that hollow stem. Number 1, the edible chanterelle, will not. So I'm gonna make this really quick and easy for you. Sometimes in a live audience, we might have people raise their hands on this, but I'm just gonna say number 1 is that false chanterelle. Number 2 is another kind of false chanterelle called a pine spike. Again, look at how thin those gills are up there. Number 3, remember that curled under edge that was pink? That's the pink edge chanterelle. That's a good one. Number 4, remember the scales on top? That's the scaly chanterelle that has the hollow stem. And number 5 is a really good golden chanterelle. Number 6 is the Cascade chanterelle, kind of egg yolk yellow on top, a little bit whitish underneath, but it's got those shallow, kind of dull gills that chanterelles have. And those gills don't stop abruptly at the same place on the stem. They're kind of irregular about it. Number 7 is actually exact duplicate of a picture on the last page, the scaly chanterelle. I guess I like that picture. Number 8 is the false chanterelle again. Notice how round and even and how thin the stem is. Number 9 is another pink chanterelle, pink edge chanterelle. Hedgehogs are pretty good. They have teeth underneath. They tend to come a little later. They have a kind of a lighter color than the chanterelles do too. And here's some examples of those. Lobsters are an orange mushroom. It coats a white mushroom called the short-stemmed russula. The short-stemmed russula is a boring mushroom by itself. If it gets the orange fungus coating it, and it becomes a lobster mushroom, becomes distorted. First of all, look at that upper right one. It doesn't look like a normal mushroom. It would without the orange coating, but it'd be white. And they have a flat cap and have nice gills under it. But the lobster on it has distorted it. It's growing all through it. It makes it rich tasting and really, really good. Because of all the crooks and crannies in them, they're a little bit harder to clean, but they're really tasty. And they're out kind of early. So they're out now, lobster mushrooms. Goat's beard, I mentioned earlier about the lion's mane, that they're cultivating it. The goat's beard in the upper left there is not cultivated. It only grows on dead logs, dead stumps, and dead snags. And it's very, very mild flavored. You don't taste much with it, but the texture is good. Makes nice soup. Chicken of the woods you can't miss. Pig sitting on a log there, and on her right, it's so bright orange and yellow you can't miss. But you only want the outer inch of it because it gets thick and woody inside. When you cook it thoroughly, it does taste like chicken. However, a few people do have a little bit of a allergic reaction to that mushroom. So it's good to only start with a teaspoon of it, thoroughly cooked, wait 24 hours, and then if there's no reaction, you're good to go. If you feel a little queasy, maybe that's not the mushroom for you. There's plenty more. The king bully, have to talk about that. That is, the porcini is one of the best in the world, and it does in fact grow around the world. Porcini is, or porcino, I guess that should be, porcini is plural. Porcino, king bully in England, the cep in France. It's also the penny bun in England. Mostly here we call it the king bully. Oh, the Steinpilz in Germany. Pilz is mushroom and Stein is like a beer stein, I guess. So it's like a big beer glass mushroom in Germany. So it's got lots of names around the world, and it's kind of a steak of the mushroom world. You can dry it really well. I think you'll see some pictures of that in just a moment. What's one of these nice fat buttons? Eugene in the upper right there has got a really nice fat button. And in the lower right, you can see where I've cut it a little bit to get the soil and stuff off it. And it actually shows, when I cut the bottom, it shows whether or not it has bugs in it or not. This shows it better. If you cut it in half, you do not want to see these tunnels of fungus gnat larvae tunneling through your wonderful, what you thought was a wonderful bolete, and spreading bacteria and whatever else larvae spread through there. So we compost that. If you have large fir trees out in your back 40, hey, throw them back there. Maybe the spores will take hold, who knows? Especially if it's a moist spot. Morels come out in the springtime, and they there's lots of kinds of morels. One of the kinds likes burned. So in fact, all these fires may have a few morels in them in the spring. They're kind of hard to spot. So you can see my Swiss Army knife down there in the bottom. Just to the left of those two dark things are morels. And there's a couple more scattered in there. They can be tough to find. There's a whole bunch more, but I'd rather, we're gonna save those for another day. They're not in the show, but there's a whole bunch more, and we're gonna try to attempt to close here, my window, and look at your questions. Are you there, Holly and Peg? There's Holly.
Thank you, Bruce. That was awesome. Yeah, so at this point, why don't we transition to some questions? I know some have come through, and we'll invite Peg to turn on her video and microphone, and I'll let you two take it from here.
Okay, we'll start off with 3 great questions from Charlie Quinn, and invite people to type in if they have questions into the question and answer. So the first question is, I've heard that inky caps and maybe shaggy parasols combined with alcohol result in illness. Are there any other combinations that we should be wary of?
No, not with alcohol, other than it's just advised the first time you try a new mushroom, and I would say something particularly like the sulfur shelf chicken of the woods that's known to be a little bit edgy for a small minority of people. That might be the case to wait on the alcohol and not have it at the same meal. What do you think about that, Peg?
So looking at some internet research, there are a few other species like oyster that some people have had some reactions with, but for the most part, it's just inky cap or any species within the Coprinopsis genus. Inky cap is what Charlie mentioned. It's the one that will dissolve into ink, Coprinopsis ultramentarius. But again, different people react different ways, and so following the edibility guidelines the first time you try a species, don't have alcohol. So another question is, goat's beard can have a texture like crab, so I like it prepared similarly as a vegetarian, as crab cakes. And so that is, I think, more of a comment, observation, and we will definitely take recipes if you'd like to share that in the question and answer.
Maybe send the recipe to Holly and she can include it in the email tomorrow, if that's possible.
Goat's beard has a lovely texture. It's kind of chewy, and so it's really nice in soups and casseroles and gratins. And I think that's a really clever idea on crab cakes. Another question is, I have had trouble finding much information on indigenous people's use of mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
Any insights or stories?
Same, ditto for me. I have a very difficult time finding anything. There is a speaker scheduled. Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned this. We have I must have left off a slide at the end there. That's good. We have a mushroom show coming up every year. It's on the 4th Sunday in October. This year, as you can guess, it's going to be virtual. So instead of a mushroom festival, we're calling it a vestival. Virtual festival is a festival. It'll be mostly on that day, the same day, which it normally would be on, which is Sunday, October 25th. One of our speakers is going to speak about Natural and Cultural History of Magic Mushrooms in British Columbia. So he's Andy McKinnon, for those of you familiar with the book on plants that he and Jim Pojar put together. So we might get a little bit of enlightenment there from Andy McKinnon on at least historic uses and maybe current uses of that group of mushrooms, the magic mushrooms. Trying to think if M. Cat Anderson's book, Tending the Wild of California, I think talks about them really briefly, but very little about the mushrooms. It's mostly about plants. Anything else, Peg, that you can think of?
No, I'm not aware of much documented information. My understanding was that there is historically not that much use of culinary mushrooms, possibly medicinal, but we've lost a lot of that knowledge.
Okay. Other questions?
So here's a question. I've been told that chanterelles are found in old growth forest. I've also heard that second growth is more promising. Can you clarify?
Both are correct. Yes, stands as young as 15 to 20-year-old Douglas fir can host chanterelles, Pacific golden chanterelles. Stands that are exclusively spruce will hold, whatever age, are the ones to look for that pink edge chanterelle. But anything from 20, let me up that a little bit, let's say 20, 25 years on up can have chanterelles. I haven't found white chanterelles in young stands as much as golden ones in young stands. The white ones, I've personally found them in older stands.
Yeah, in general, you'll find higher density of golden chanterelles in the younger stands, and they occur in the old growth, but less commonly so. Do we have any additional questions?
Just a comment from Charlie. He says, use goat's beard as a substitute for crab in any recipe.
With the rain we're having, when do you expect the chanterelles to start appearing in the Coast Range?
Well, the Coast Range is interesting. Right on the coast, where the fog comes in and hits the first elevation changes, the fog starts in the summer and can hit those trees and drip, and it can actually get chanterelles, some chanterelles scattered along the coast, really close to the ocean in July, starting in July and August. Further up in the Coast Range, let's see, our friend Shusher had found some chanterelles about 3 or 4 weeks ago up there. Pick and I were out last weekend, and we were out in some habitats really close to the ocean. And what it looked like what had happened is the first rain we had brought things out, and then all the warmth we've had made them mold. Now, mold is another fungus. Is that good? Well, no, not when you're looking for edibles. So the few mushrooms that were out were all moldy. They were yucky. So, but some other people have had a little better luck out there, but I think now with the second round of rain, we're going to see some real action picking up in the Coast Range. So I would say if you can go out Saturday in the Coast Range, you should start hitting them, particularly moisture habitats, also along streams, places that aren't obviously really warm and dry is where you want to look. And remember, it's a mycorrhizal mushroom, so you're not going to look in the middle of a meadow for it, right? You're going to look in the forest.
And we have time for, I think, one more question. If there are any additional questions that someone would like to type in the question and answer box.
Okay, Holly, I think we're good.
Great. Thank you both so very much. I really appreciate your willingness to share your time and expertise with us. Time spent with the two of you is always time well spent. all of you who've joined us this evening, and I look forward to adventures exploring nature's wonders like mushrooms in the field. And until then, please join us next week for our second HabiChat with the Executive Director from the McKenzie Watershed Council, Jared Waybright. He'll be presenting on Stage 0 river restoration, which is a practice to help restore the natural processes needed to promote and maintain dynamic stream ecosystems. So I'm going to go ahead and include a link to register for that HabiChat if you're interested to join us next Thursday. And again, I'll be sending an email out tomorrow with a link to this video and some other resources that Bruce has to share with all of you. I hope you all have a lovely evening and a restorative weekend. Thank you so much, and I'm posting that link right now for folks. Thank you, Bruce and Peg, very much for joining. It's
Our
been
pleasure.
wonderful.
Take care and happy hunting, everyone.